I'm Nathan Shapura, political advisor at the European People's Party, and on behalf of the EPP, welcome to another episode of EPP Family Talks. Over the past several weeks, we've been hearing from leaders throughout our political family about the ideas and projects they've been working on, especially during this time of coronavirus crisis. Today, it is our great pleasure to welcome Mr. Urmas Reinsalu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia. Minister, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hello, Nathan, and hello everybody in EPP family and also other kind people.
We've been asking all of our leaders as we start this interview series, just how are they doing? So how are you doing? How are you coping? My understanding is maybe you were just giving a speech even in the Estonian parliament. So how are things like for you these days?
Quite intensive, and it has been a crisis indeed with peak letter of my lifetime, and I think for our generation in a way. What has made it the most challenging is that this crisis is not solely a health crisis, but it is a hybrid one, and it has occurred all the globe. So it means by the perspective we are looking after the economic measures, about the economic crisis we are facing. We are looking about the restrictions put on people of movement over the borders and many other things. And let me say that I think when we usually say in peacetime about the importance of solidarity between the nations, now I think it is felt also in a way like physically how much we need it, that also psychologically to stay by each other shoulders, that you can trust your friends, neighboring countries, other countries, you share the same values. And I think this crisis has paved a lot of a criticism about the actions, what has been made, or to passivity of the European Union. I think, but the core issue that we are in that global mess together, and we have to jointly work us out, and there is no alternative. I think this is actually a universal message I have felt.
I know you're working on some very big things as Minister for Foreign Affairs. Maybe first, can I just ask you, give us an update? What's happening on the ground now in Estonia? What's the situation like?
Now we are seeing actually the exit strategy being implemented in Estonia. Gradually, we are now returning to a new normality. There are certain health security measures which are still and are going to be during summer valid to avoid concentration of people, and also we will remain this 2+2 principle of people together. But what was very positive message of the joint action was actually the case that on last Friday, we co-signed with Latvian and Lithuanian foreign ministers an agreement which reopened the totally free movement of our residents to the territories of each other. It is it was a precedent in Europe, and it created a certain Baltic bubble. And we are very excited to enhance that when the health arguments are valid. And I think that it's very important now, because it is easier to put on restriction, but it is far more complicated now, taking into consideration the security concerns of health, now to start to ease them. And I think the most challenging is indeed the free movement, return of free movement of people again over the borders, and what is particularly important inside the Schengen area.
I know that is something which is very welcome to all the citizens in your area, and I want to ask you about these lifting of travel restrictions later on in the interview. But my first question about your own portfolio is, I know you're working on something very big now, which is Estonia's chairing this month's UN Security Council. I saw you held recently a very important big virtual event called Lessons for Peace to reflect on the end of the Second World War. And you yourself gave a message in which you stressed three main principles: the importance of freedom, the unanimous, clear rejection of the illegal use of force, and an urgent call for international cooperation. And my question would just be, why was this event and why was your message so important, especially at a time like this?
Well, I think I'm particularly proud that it created a certain international fora precedent during that coronavirus crisis. That for the first time, although digitally, we were the representatives of all continents of the planet were able to communicate and on a particular item. And it was about 80 countries taking part in that Security Council event, which was dedicated to the end of Second World War in Europe, 75th anniversary. And surely I addressed also the current security concerns in Europe, where we actually see still Russian annexation in large parts of European continent still going on. And I think it is also was very important signal that as in recent times, Russia has tried to, in a way, falsify the historical facts about the events which led to the Second World War and the outcome. I think it was very important that in that the highest level of international fora, it was very clearly got also a strong response. And surely there was also countries taking part addressed also current corona crisis. And also Estonia was in the Security Council, the first country. We asked the Security Council to debate on that matter. And we are now seriously working on to pass also the Security Council resolution on COVID virus. Security Council was able to do it when there was Ebola virus spread. Surely also there are grand security and international peace implications also to the world, also because of coronavirus. But still there has been no consensus which is needed to pass the Security Council resolution, which is a shame, and we are going to work on that.
I'll pick up on what you mentioned about the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. In addition to the Lessons for Peace event, Estonia also joined with several other partners in issuing a very strong statement on the end of the war. You joined with the U.S. Secretary of State, also the foreign ministers from Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. And I know last week as well, you held a call with the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. And my question would just be, with regard to the transatlantic partnership, why has this relationship, this partnership been so essential for Estonia, for Europe over these past many decades, and why is it still so essential?
I think it is, when we're speaking our way of life, our European way of life, our Atlantic way of life, Western way of life. So actually the share of that space where we carry on by our societies, by our culture, by our joint rules, that way of life is actually, the share of that is diminishing in globe. Demographically, our share is diminishing also relatively economically, also by military security capabilities. And looking to that trend over the generations, we are seeing a century in our perspective. That is actually, if we have to keep our way of life, to defend our interests, also give our message to the world, there is no alternative to our solid transatlantic tie. There is no alternatives. And anybody who believes in which shore of Atlantic his home is, it doesn't matter, that there is actually in his or her strategic interest to have a certain autonomy to act in a security and other strategic matters by him or herself. This is actually optical illusion. By fatality of figures and global trends, there is no alternative. And that is very important also, surely from Estonian perspective, from our geopolitical position. Very clear message that stable, secure European continent, the integral part of that is a NATO solidarity, where, well, the biggest provider of military security is US. So there have been problems between Europe, between US over the times. And when we are looking about the trade battles, well, also when Obama was president, there were debates to put tariffs on French champagne and so on, so on. And the rhetorics and indeed has arisen. We see in both shores of Atlantic. But what is most important is to understand and to keep the issues in different baskets. That all the different views and interests of our economy, legitimate economic interests and so on, we should not let it harm our bridge, which is over the Atlantic Ocean. This is actually the core of our security, and in generations' perspective, it is going to be also the core how we will remain vitally our way of life, our transatlantic way and Western way of life.
I'd like to pick up on something else you mentioned, which was attempts or efforts by Russia in particular to falsify, let's say, the historical record. Of course, one of the main challenges we've seen in the 21st century is new challenges with regards to digital media, how to authenticate, how to verify the truthfulness of digital media. And we've seen that in particular, maybe even more so during this coronavirus crisis. How do you see the issue of disinformation playing out during this pandemic and now going forward?
Well, I think this disinformation is used as a certain hybrid warfare weapon. In one thing, used by states or by non-actors or by political agents in public fora. This will, with so vast spread of information, which is actually geometrical rise, speaking about the technical possibilities, it will follow mankind. There is no secret about that. And actually, the one thing is indeed to label such kind of acts. What is very important, particularly the acts to involve to other countries' internal business and political decision making. This is actually very important need of particularly like-minded countries to cooperate. But what is very important is also the education of hybrid and digital hygiene, that the younger generation would understand also in an objective way, could divide the facts, opinions, and also the sources which are sharing that. And this is something actually we in Estonia, what we are very proud of, our digital developments. We have also put to our school curriculum so that all the school children will get also educated on that. Whether it's effective, surely it is in the mind of a human being to make decisions what he or she believes or wants to believe. But I remember as once Josip Brodsky said that man always has two opportunities, either to live in a free world or to live in a prison. And we see also the countries attempting to some kind of to put the censorship over the social media. So I think this is not a Western view to move on. I think the Western view should be indeed to balance false with truth. Thank you.
I'd like to finish the interview with a couple of more personal, more informal questions, but I have one more serious question, more policy-related question for you. And that is, I know you've been an active member of our EPP foreign ministerial meetings. So how do you see the EPP family, let's say, showing leadership during this crisis? And what would you say are the next steps for the European Union? I know you've just mentioned the importance of education, both in terms of technical capacity and teaching critical thinking. But looking forward, what would you say are the next steps?
I think surely the EPP leadership, particularly the Commission leadership, has been magnificent. And I think what the attitude of Europe now, as our family shares that view, and also the European, I think the large now feeling is that against that crisis, as health crisis and economic crisis coming as a wave after that, we have to be on offensive, not defensive. And therefore, I think these grand, majestic packages and proposals made by Commission and what we are trying to stabilize our European economies. This is a very shows us that actually this is a very important element. And secondly, also we know that by definition or by decision-making definition, democracies tend to be slower than autocracies or dictatorships, and also in a fragile times. And I think this is a lesson to be learned, I think, from these also extraordinary times, which are going to be continued, is indeed that time is of critical importance in passing these decisions. And also from my experience on that perspective, when we made also decisions in Estonia during the crisis, that the decision what you considered in the morning, in the evening looked already too little. So I think, I feel now it also gradually has been taken as a European stance to tackle the crisis.
We really appreciate your sharing your perspective with us. One of the things I appreciated about looking at what you were doing and saying at the Lessons for Peace event was you thanked Timothy Snyder, the historian, one of my own favorite historians, in framing the event at the very beginning. And so my next question for you is one which we've asked to many of our leaders as well. Is there a book, is there a film which you've recently watched or read, which you might recommend? Of course, not necessarily Timothy Snyder, but what would you say? What would you recommend for us?
Well, I just yesterday spoke with Mikhail Lotman, who is a professor of semiotics and is a son of a famous deceased academician and thinker, Yuri Lotman. We spoke about the one book and one author, Umberto Eco, and his book, a novel, Name of Rose, which actually has very many different floors of thinking. But I think in these very turbulent times, it is very important to look at the events, what are happening, or history, what is happening or now passing over our eyes. We have to look also from the cultural perspective, historical perspective, and look also the challenges which were facing, well, generations last century, but also hundreds of years back. And in that perspective, we can put also that story and narrative we are now passing through maybe to the proper context, and know that as earlier generations were brave to survive and to manage, I think it will give also strength and willpower to be also responsible for the decisions we are making in sake of future generations.
I think our Italian producer here really appreciated that particular recommendation, and I think it's always very helpful and very good to give us a bit of a narrative perspective and helping us to understand important issues.
Yes, Sean Connery film made in Name of Rose. And also I remember there's one Italian version also made. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it is a masterpiece.
My understanding from the body language of my producer is that indeed it's maybe something worth watching. So my final question is, you mentioned the lifting of travel restrictions between Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania is a very positive first step. Travel restrictions are beginning to lift across the continent. Is there somewhere in particular that you would most like to visit?
Well, it is paradoxical when in Soviet times I couldn't leave only inside the Soviet inside the Soviet Schengen to move, but not to the West, looking only magazines how the life is in West. And now, when I made last week my first foreign travel to Riga, which is basically 300 kilometers by car south from Tallinn, I was a little bit excited when I passed over the border. So the dimension of the free movement of people has changed, at least paradoxically, in our minds. So, well, I think I'm very excited to see my colleagues. I hope in the near future, it will be nearer when we expect indeed people are free to move. And what is very important, that we have a trust measures, that we have also, it's very important that we psychologically feel safe. So it actually is vital also for businesses, for tourism, for people moving for fun, that we know that there is not extra dangers for us when going to Italy, going to other countries.
Mr. Urmas Reinsalu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for sharing your ideas with us. On behalf of the EPP, thanks for the work you're doing, and we wish you and your family all the best.
All the best and remain in good health. Thank you.
To all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in to this episode of EPP Family Talks. To all of you celebrating a holiday this week, please enjoy your time off safely and healthily, and we look forward to seeing you again next week for the next episode in our series. Have a great day and see you then.